He is literally dripping in oil, his whole body the whole time, and he is jacked as. And as Monty says, like some sort of mad 80s meme, he just starts playing a saxophone.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
It's time for another episode of Foreplay here on Last Free Nation Culture. You should obviously be subscribing to this channel and also telling your friends to subscribe to this channel. They too can watch these great movies, mostly great movies, along with us.
Even though I appreciate you have to do it, Monty, and it is like part of the business. The problem with that is, though, I'm just thinking, like, if even one of my friends actually ever sent me a message, hey, subscribe to this great channel, I'd be like, you fuck off, man. That's obnoxious. Like, so in a way, like, I appreciate we need them to do it, but I would never associate with that behavior.
Well, you guys can bring your friends along for the ride as we suggest movies, and then once you suggest the movie and you watch it together with your friends, then you just slip them the show afterwards, right? That's the technique. That's the technique.
I like it.
The problem is, otherwise it had that vibe of, like, you know, when you're into like some like edgy podcast and they're like, remember to share it on all social media. Like, I'm not doing that. Like, man, I might have a listen, you idiot. I'm not associating my brand with yours. I'll get banned. Why am I going to do that? But obviously, in our case, we're not ban worthy, so you're safe. It's safe
Indeed,
to do.
You are safe to do this. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so we're now halfway through. This is our third episode of 1980s vampire movies. We started with The Hunger, and then, of course, we proceeded to Fright Night. We skipped a week just because of our schedule, so sorry about that, guys. This week will be The Lost Boys, and next week we will conclude with Near Dark. As I have said many times about Near Dark, it is not currently in distribution, so you will have to be creative to find it. I trust we have some tech-savvy people who can either go to Amazon or another site and purchase a Blu-ray disc, or I don't know, perhaps you have some other methods of watching movies. I don't know what those might be.
This way, if you just understand like basic search engine manipulation, you will be able to find it. I'll just tell you that much. It's really not like that hidden in that sense, you know.
And it is worth your time.
Make your own decisions about how to live your life and what your morals are and all that jazz.
If we had a VPN sponsor, this might be where I plug it. So maybe we should get one. Anyway, if you guys want to do that, I would recommend finding yourself a copy of Near Dark legally, of course. And if you do, you will not be disappointed. It actually is a very good film and a very important film because it was directed by Catherine Bigelow, who later became a famous Oscar-winning director. So worth your time. Yeah. Worth your time. But we are going to start with The Lost Boys today. Now, probably a lot of you have seen this movie. It is Joel Schumacher. He is a, I don't know, notorious director. How would you describe him?
He is a flamboyant director. No, I think Joel Schumacher is, if you had to describe his career in kind of a succinct way, he is the person that executes high concept, as the terminology they use in the industry, movies, and does it with very stylistic approach. It's style over substance in a lot of ways. But, you know, he's the guy that sort of created the Batman franchise with Batman and Robin.
Well, he took it over from Tim Burton and then made the nipple suits of Batman Forever and Batman and Robin.
Credit cards and all that bullshit. That's all Joel Schumacher. I mean, look, you know, one thing I would definitely say about him is I don't think he gets enough credit. I think he's definitely directed like some solid movies that people forget about, that they're in his canon. You know, he did Flatliners. That's another one.
Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah, another Kiefer Sutherland one. He did there's a really Falling Down. There you go. He did Falling Down with Michael Douglas. That's another like low key. You have to watch it once. It's not aged particularly well, that movie, I might add, but you know, so he is
Meters with Nicolas Cage. If people have ever seen that one, it's a good one.
Yeah, another one. He did the Phone Booth when
Which
Colin
wasn't a,
Farrell
it was a
was
good
coming.
popcorn movie if people ever saw it. It's a good,
Yeah.
good one-off watch.
So, I mean, it's, you know, when people think about Joel Schumacher, a lot of people do lean into the Batman, you know, stuff. But actually, low-key, he's done some movies that you wouldn't even know they were Joel Schumacher movies to watch them. But what's great about, like, what I like about I like Joel Schumacher when he goes full Schumacher. Like, I actually like it when he does that.
I love this movie, so I agree.
Yeah. And well, this was his first opportunity to do it in '87. I mean, he's still a relatively new director. His directorial debut was a remake of The Incredible Shrinking Man, but done as The Incredible Shrinking Woman in '81. And then he blew up with St. Elmo's Fire, which he was the writer and director of. And then suddenly he was very vogue. And as we've established in previous episodes, you know, '80s. Vampire movies were all of the rage. There was this renaissance, and what he wanted to do was make basically a sort of sexy, you know, a sexy gay vampire movie, which is just fucking great. And he did, like, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed the rewatch.
It's so good.
I was actually thinking this was going to be cringe. But it's actually based, Monty.
It's mega. I actually think this is the best of the 4 movies that we've done, and we haven't done yet the next week. We'll do Near Dark. But for me, this was the best of the 4. And I would just say this. I'm with you. I think people do that thing, which I really hate. It's a bit like when people say, like, oh, I'm a huge fan of this, like, musical artist. And you actually find out they just know their one famous, like, really big hit song. And they just know that one song. But they maybe don't even know that, like, for example, maybe the rest of the artist's work isn't like that. Maybe that was like a one-off weird, like, pop song or the thing they did, or maybe they sold out for that one. So I would say the same thing with Joel Schumacher. People are just going to meme because of the Batman thing. Like, oh, he's just a hack, isn't he? Definitely not. What are you talking about? Like Richard said when he ran off some of the names of the movies he's done, this is a really good director. Like, look, I will say he's not trying to be like some European art house director with like all like innovative technique. It's very much like traditional Hollywood techniques and tropes, but he's really good with it. Like, I thought this movie was mega. Like, put it this way, if you consider earlier in the series we did Fright Night, the level of production difference in direction between that movie and this is night and day. Like, this movie's actually really good for that. Like, I actually think the first hour of this movie is really strong. Like, the fucking direction is awesome. Like, the way he does like the use of color palettes in different scenes. I thought the soundtrack's a banger, actually. The way it all fits together. Again, it's very much 80s music. I mean, that's the funny thing about this movie. It actually fits a lot of tropes of 80s and early 90s movies, and obviously youth culture and things. We'll talk about some of the themes. But I thought it just did it well, though. That's why, to me, this director definitely is not a hack. He's actually showing like a high level of competence. Just, I get that some people didn't like some of the other movies he did, which is fair enough. And I agree. I also thought, like, I saw this movie in, I'm going to say, like, probably the late 90s, early 2000s. I thought this was going to, like, be a bit hawky when we watched it back. I thought it was really good, actually. I was shocked at how good it was.
Yeah, and another little interesting context to add to it is that I think the movie is so sort of, like, extreme in its like very clear like direction and the things it wants to say and the gay subtext running through this movie. You know, it's kind of interesting. There's like an interview before he directed this where he said like he was going through a mega promiscuous time before, you know, he sort of found his groove in like, you know, directing and becoming like big in Hollywood. And because of the AIDS crisis, he was utterly convinced he was going to die. Like, he
is gay, by the way, for context. Yeah. He is gay. Joel Schumacher is gay.
It's okay.
Yeah. So I mean, very flamboyantly and out and
proudly.
I
wasn't even aware of that.
Yeah. So he said that like you know, he was super worried. Like,
if anything, that makes that Batman thing less weird than that he was doing some weird camp sort of nipples on the leather. Like, actually, that just seems more within the wheelhouse.
That was exactly what he was trying to do. He wanted to imprint it. But anyway, he said he'd had sex with like maybe 20,000 guys. Is what he claims, right? And so he was just utterly convinced. He because he had a friend who wasn't promiscuous and died of AIDS, so he was like, all right, fuck it. So he literally, when he was making this movie, I think there was like almost a kind of there's nothing to lose, like a real fearlessness in the queer coding he's put into the film. And I think the movie is so much like better for it. Anyway, sorry, man. I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves.
Do the premise and all that.
Okay, so what I will say to jump off of Thorin's point is that what strikes you most about this movie is that it's just so cool. It is so cool. It encapsulates everything that you would want about coolness and like being a trendy teenager in the 1980s.
Even the thing I said earlier about how it's very 80s. Like, look, I wouldn't listen to a lot of this music, but in the atmosphere and ambience of this movie, it's dope. Like, some of it I was even thinking, some of this is like banging, actually, this music. Even sounds very classically 80s, you know?
Yeah, the music is great. Obviously, the theme song, Cry Little Sister, sounds a lot like the goth music, which is an excellent track. You get to see the clothing, the motorcycle jackets. Like, Kiefer Sutherland actually manages to rock a bleach blonde mullet in a way that I didn't think could possibly be cool, but he makes it cool. They have all the big hairband hair. The environment of Santa Carla, the city that they're in, and the boardwalk is just...
It's mega stereotypical. Like, this could be like fucking like Less Than Zero or something. Like, well, any other classic 80s ambient movie. It's like the total aesthetic.
But
absolutely.
It's, it at night with all the carnival rides and them riding their motorcycles on the boardwalk. This movie is just so cool. And I think that's why you can see how it was so popular with teenagers at the time, because this blew up when it was released. It was a surprisingly large success because the youth of the 80s really identified with this film and absolutely loved it. And you can really understand why, because it is just peak cool from that era. And I really enjoyed that about it.
By the way, also, in terms of the cast, like, the cast is ridiculous in light of the fact that all of them go on to be much more famous people do other things. And then, if you're going to have an 80s movie with teenage hijinks, like, it's almost too on the nose to have Corey Haim and Corey Feldman beat those people. Like, they are just, like, the ridiculous characters who in every one of these movies.
This was their first movie together.
And but the joke is, you'd think it was just like, again, like get the other ones for all the other movies, like, because again, they go on to be that character from this movie and all the other movies they do. So first of all, like, they are like the comedic relief, obviously. I actually thought the real shocker was Jason Patric, the lead character, if people don't know. Like, first of all, I can't even remember he was in this. Like, I associate him more with like his 90s work and later on, etc. Like, first of all, he looked mega as this role. I thought you did a great job as well. Like, I thought this actual casting was very well done. Even the guy who, when we get to later in the storyline, with the big reveal of who the actual big bad was, what perfect casting. Like, that's even if you know American tropes, very clever casting. Because one thing as a rule I do believe in is the Raymond Chandler thing, that you never lie to the audience. You never, like, show me something that isn't true, that isn't happening, so that then later I'm tricked, like, oh, it wasn't him all along. It's like, what do you mean? Oh, no, that was just a dream, but I didn't tell you. You don't do that because that's a cheap way to trick the audience. But the way they trick you to make this character, because basically the character who's revealed to be the big bad guy at the end, who obviously we don't do spoilers on the show, it just is the Max guy that's like dating their mother, which is a central theme of the movie and clearly some of the undertones. When they reveal this character, the reason it's so perfectly cast is because that actor is exactly who you would cast if it was the red herring, if it was the one where they think it's him but it's not really, and of course it is just some nerd guy that your mother's dating or whatever. Like, the idea that was the evil guy at the end, I thought was really well cast. Like, it's a great twist to put on it. That is the least likely person you'd expect would be revealed at the end as like the head vampire, you know.
All right, so here is the quick summary of The Lost Boys. So the idea of this is that Jason Patric, who's the older brother, and Corey Haim, who's the younger brother, move with their mother to Santa Carla, California, which is Santa Cruz, California, by the way, which is on the Central Coast. Yeah. They filmed it in Santa Cruz with the boardwalk. The reason why they didn't call it Santa Cruz was they didn't want the bad publicity, because as they're driving in and they see the sign Santa Carla, it says like, murder capital of the world on the back, which, by the way, in the 70s, there were multiple serial killers that were active in Santa Cruz at the time. So it actually was called the murder capital of the world. So Santa Cruz was trying to move beyond that from the 80s, but it would have been very well known amongst Americans at that time that there was like a lot of mysterious serial killers that were active within the last decade. So it also makes sense that people would be randomly dying to vampires there. So it's actually a really good historical context that partially explains how people would just be kind of accepting or aware of mysterious deaths that were happening within this city. So they moved to Santa Carla. She gets divorced. She takes her boys to go live with her dad in this very deeply awesome house filled with taxidermy. Just the sets are amazing within this movie. And they're being teenagers on this boardwalk at night, and Jason Patric's character Mykles sees this girl, gets enchanted by her, and then she is hanging out with a bunch of teenage vampires who are led by Kiefer Sutherland, whose name is David. He starts becoming a vampire because he follows them to their lair and drinks some blood. And then he's trying to, basically the rest of the movie is a bunch of kids trying to hunt down these vampires, Mykles trying to not become a vampire, and for them to figure out who the head vampire is, because if they kill him, then they will reverse the vampirism curse on Mykles. So it's a pretty straightforward plot, actually. It's pretty
I
straightforward.
will just say also another thing that's aged, some could say very, very well, because it's unintentional in this regard. It's just coincidental, or it's a synchronicity, isn't it? So essentially, all I'm going to say is, I'm going to phrase it very carefully, be quite precise. So Corey Haim and Corey Feldman were in a movie where the premise is all the popular people with authority that are around you are actually evil, blood-sucking vampires who want to feed on the young. No one believes you, and it's actually up to you to get out or to kill them. All I'm saying is, in some ways, this movie never ended for these two, did it? You know, so leave it there.
So dark.
It's very dark.
I know that now when I'm watching this movie back, like, bloody hell, fucking hell, mate. Like,
yeah, so for those of you who don't know, the what became known as the two Coreys, so Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, after this movie, they were both, I don't know what, like 14, 15 looked like when this movie was made, ended up going on a string of later films together and became quite famous. And then both of them really struggled with drug addiction, which was also...
And the two iconic, like, young stars that, like, didn't make it to basically out of that and had sort of fucked up lives after that, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. And so it was a lot of success at a very young age, and a really solid film partnership that resulted in very unhealthy eventual lifestyles. And I think to put this in context too, I was reading about some of the background on this movie, and apparently, because they had all of these teenage actors and extras and everything like that, when they were filming this, apparently it was just a crazy party, like crazy out of control, drugs, alcohol, everything that was going on at night after they were done filming. And so it basically, they managed to successfully create the atmosphere both on and off camera that they wanted for this movie. And they filmed this over like 3 or 4 weeks within Santa Cruz. And apparently it was just wild. And I think the fortunate part is that it resulted in a very believable atmosphere as part of the film. But the unfortunate part is it probably set up a lot of these young actors for very serious, lifelong substance abuse problems.
I mean, the funny thing is, that is, in my opinion, one of the tropes I took from this movie, is that I thought a clear underlying message, since it's the 80s as well, is the idea of like peer pressure, isn't it? Like, it's like one of the main things with the Mykles guy is like, essentially he is getting peer pressured into being a vampire, as you might be peer pressured into getting involved with hard drugs or being a part of a gang or something. If you notice, that's one of the things in general a lot of these 80s vampires movies we're doing now. That is another trope a lot of them tried to play on, was the social dynamic of what young people were facing and how that could be a parallel for being sort of lured into being a vampire or the victim of a vampire, etc.
Yeah, I gotta say, I thought Corey Haim, it was like wicked in this film as well, for like a younger actor.
Oh yeah,
I was kind of watching it with like a real fucking pang of sadness about the way his life went and obviously his eventual death, and it's like, it's kind of sad because I was like looking at the other movies he did, and this is probably the peak.
Probably his best.
Yeah, and you can see that he had like some uncredited roles in other like Joel Schumacher movies. He obviously was trying to like help him out, and then they did a straight to video sequel to The Lost Boys that no one's seen called The Tribe. And it's just fucking sad, dude. Like this kid really could have been something, and it's like you say, Monty, this environment. Yeah, it's like, this is like the apocalypse now of like teen movies. Like, everyone's fucking wasted the entire time. The stories around the onset antics are like legendary. Even actors you wouldn't expect it from, like the dude from Bill and Ted.
Alex Winter. Yeah.
Alex Winter. This guy was ever in as well. I know.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, so it's really sad. Like, but encapsulated forever is this really fantastic performance from Corey as Mykles' little brother. He does a really, really good job in this film, and it would have been a much more expanded role because the original screenplay was going to be a rip-off essentially of The Goonies. The people that wrote people that, yeah, that's why you've got all these like residual components of it with the Frog Brothers. But originally, it was going to be the vampires were 13 and 14-year-olds, and the Frog Brothers were going to be like 8, 9, 10.
Right.
You know, and that's how they were. And it was going to be like a vampire movie for kids with the adventure aspects like the Goonies. But yeah, once Joel Schumacher got attached to it, he was like, no, let's make this a stupid sexy vampire movie, let's go. And so obviously everyone's ages were fucking brought up. But I think Corey, like, usually I look back at the child actors and you go, were they ever good? But for this type of movie and this type of role, Corey's actually really,
he's great.
You know, he's iconic in this film. You know?
Yeah, I think he really does show. He plays the part of a young teenager who's interested in comics and trying to like come to terms with reality versus fiction while having genuine concern for his older brother and trying to save him. And it does have, you know, some of that same charm that you saw later in Home Alone, where it's this young this like kid trapping his house in order to like booby trapping the house in order to succeed over the vampires, which is like obviously a childhood fantasy that you could do something like that. It's a fun game. So I think it's really, he does a really, really good job in this. And just to point something out, Richard, about we talked about Fright Night, and I said you could have gotten any number of other better actors to play the teenagers in that movie. And I was thinking about that while I was watching this, where all of the acting from the teenagers is incredibly good. It's incredibly good. Like Jason Patric is good. Kiefer Sutherland is fucking amazing in this movie. He nails this role of David, he's just so deeply cool while also being sinister and seductive. He doesn't even have that many lines, but his facial expressions, like his little smirks, the way he looks at Jason Patric's character is just so fabulous. And I think Fright, like, it really just stood in comparison to those teenage performances in Fright Night, and I really wish we had gotten better actors for that movie.
This is what I say to me. I see this as like a peer pressure movie, because to me, that's the dual pull of the movie. It's obviously initially the Jason Patric character is attracted by the girl he wants, who's involved with their group. But then the other part is supposed to be the idea that the Kiefer Sutherland guy is the guy you want to be as well, isn't he? That's the cool guy that you can take after and get the leather jacket and get his aesthetic, etc. It's why I even think the one part in the movie, one thing I do like about this film as well, is that it's another movie that doesn't like bash you over the head with exposition. They have a little bit from the aforementioned child actors who do like sort of like the vampire hunting gig. They give you like a little bit of info, but like, for example, the main vampires are never even saying we're vampires. They never even say here's where we come from or what we do. They never give you any of that, because that's not necessary. Like, this is a movie that's about the vibe. Essentially, you're like the lead character. You're just getting introduced to this mysterious world, and some of it's cool and some of it's sexy and some of it's exciting. Some of it's a bit disturbing. Some of it's a bit like, oh, how do you integrate this with your normal life, etc. But the one part that is a bit on the nose is the scene where it is revealed that like we are just vampires and essentially you're in the vampire life now. They do have the music "Walk This Way" playing in the background as the actual lyrics, which that's a bit on the nose, but like, it's a good scene. It is a good scene.
Yeah, I mean, again, like what's really interesting for me about this film is obviously at its heart, you know, it's about a guy coming out, right? Like, I mean, that's what's happening to Mykles. He's not being turned into a vampire. He's getting in touch with his closeted homosexuality. That's what the film's really going on. And like, yeah, it starts with he's chasing after a woman who's got a kid, right? And it's the picturesque ideal of heterosexuality, right? And then, as he's pursuing that, he bumps into, stupid, sexy Kiefer Sutherland. And oh, bloody hell. He's leading this decadent lifestyle where he lives in this hotel that's sank into like some sort of, what was it when the earthquake happened?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
gone into
So-
sinkhole.
Yeah, it was a resort. It was like a turn of the century, like turn of the 20th century resort, which is obviously like super decadent. It's this crumbling decadence that we talked about in The Hunger.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, just as an aside, the sets in this movie are amazing.
They fucking rule.
They rule. Like the vampire lair set is so cool, and the house that they move into, the grandfather's house, is like so decrepit but also rustic. The boardwalk that they used in Santa Cruz is just amazing. All the visuals of this film, the costumes, the hair, the styling, everything is just wonderful. It's so good. It's so immersive, and it feels so real.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And so, he finds himself here. They're having a night out. Ooh, it's getting the mind games are happening. Are you eating maggots? Are you eating worms? Want to drink some blood? Whatever. You're not getting me 3 times.
That is the silliest part of it, isn't it?
I
It's
love
like,
it.
because they're using like vampire hypnotic tricks. Obviously, it is like, oh my God, it's worms. Like, oh, it's flea maggots. And then he's like, don't, it's blood. Like, you're not getting me with it.
Mykles. It's blood.
Yeah, sure.
That's great.
That's such
That's good writing.
reverse psychology. I know, it's so silly.
It's about being being suggestive, and that scene again. It's all about taking the plunge and giving into latent desire and
Men
so,
exchanging bodily fluids.
Yes, I mean it's so like how anyone doesn't get what this movie really is throwing out there is sort of beyond me. I mean, but it's right the way through its core. I mean, this isn't just Richard, you're reaching for the subtext again, but everything about it. You think about what's the other big bad element. In the conflict that's been introduced into this family. It's the failure of a marriage, a traditional marriage, and the introduction of a new man.
Yes.
And so obviously as well at the time, the idea of having leather-clad runaways as the vampires, teen runaway. This is what was happening to a lot of gay people in 80s America. They were kicked out by their families, and they had to band together to have a community so they could afford to live together, which is exactly what these guys are doing here.
It's another thing that underscores this film is really the commentary on the creation of a new family, or the question of what is a family.
Exactly,
and a lot of this to the homosexual point, part of Mykles turning is that initial revulsion from Sam, followed by Michael asking Sam, his younger brother, for help, and then them trying to figure out how to help him and reintegrate him into their family, right? Which is a very good analogy for coming out of the closet, right? And feeling, having that acceptance back in the family once you're kind of identified as what you really are. And I think also, if you just look at it, it is about, the Lost Boys themselves have formed their family, and the name of the film obviously comes from Peter Pan and this group of kids who never grow up in Neverland and who have formed kind of their own family, like Lord of the Flies style, the Society of Children. And you see that with the new, just like we saw in Fright Night, there's this kind of undertone of your mom getting seduced in both movies. Also by a vampire both times, it turns out. But the questions of what that means for your family, and can new people come into your family? Because at first the vampire guy seems very understanding and reasonable towards the kids and is trying to, date their mom, but also be respectful of the teenager's feelings regarding, this situation. And the vampire himself has created his own family with these teenage boys. and their own kind of
actually thought that part of the metaphor was also very good, because you have to remember, like, now there's been so many things done since then along these topics. This is still like 1980, whatever. Was it 7 or something on this one? Like
87.
This is still pretty early. So actually, as a metaphor for like divorced family that moves to a new area, then your mum starts dating a different guy, and initially maybe you're not into that, and then how do you integrate the two families when one might be totally different? That's actually well done, I thought, as an undertone, because initially they do it as the red herring of like that's his excuse as to why, like, oh, that's why you're fucking with me, and then he goes to that dinner when the vampire hunters try to give him the garlic and all that jazz. Like, that seems like that, but that is actually a central underlying theme of the movie, clearly.
So hold on, it is also explicitly stated by Max the vampire at the end when he said his goal is to give them a mom. Like, he wants to turn the mom into a vampire in order to be the mother of the lost boys.
Because if you know that actress Diane West, she is just one of those people who just naturally seems like a lovely person in every movie. So you are just like, get the fuck away from her. Get away from me, bastard.
Yeah, I know, yeah. She's great in all those. She did like 5 Woody Allen films, man. Bullets Over Broadway. She's fucking mega. Yeah, what an actress. Like, but yeah, I mean, but you know, some of the coding, some of the subtext isn't subtle. Like on my notes. So when for the noodles scene, I've wrote they're only noodles, Michael, and what they're saying is, you know, that it's the same to you know, a guy, a woman. You know, it's all the same. The noodles, just noodles. Just eat the noodles. Oh, no, but I'm repulsed by the noodles. Are you? It's all the same. So that's what I wrote in my notes. Also, in the initiation scene, when he drinks when he eats the noodles and drinks the blood, it cuts to Sam, his younger brother, and his grandfather comes in and says, "Got something for the room." And it's a stuffed beaver, right? It's an actual beaver that Sam then puts away. Oh, can't look at the beat. But then it cuts back and we're in the initiation scene. And then as he drinks the blood, i.e. taking the plunge into a homosexual experience, Jim Morrison, notorious bisexuals, just there in the background.
He also, in that scene, he does, the actual character, Jason Patrick's character, looks incredibly like the mirrored over effect of Jim Morrison right behind him.
I mean, he's drop dead gorgeous in this film, like absolutely.
That's what I mean. He actually is very well cast in this film.
Yeah. So and it was crazy because obviously he's in like Narc, which is like low key, great movie, and you're like, who the?
To me, he's more a straight edge sort of character. Exactly. I think he did a great one in this one.
But anyway, so I mean, look, they do that, and then obviously you're one of us. The bit when they're on the trains, train is the ultimate phallic symbol in a movie. And the train's going along the tracks, and he's trying to hold on to his heterosexuality. Like, no, and he's going, "You one of us, just take the plunge." And there's loads, like scene after scene after scene. I honestly, like, just genuinely believe Joel Schumacher wanted to just make a movie about what it's like to sort of have this. Oh God, it's so hard to fit into society, you know, and sort of. Just just give in what like who you are, like, and that to me is what the movie's about. Like
that scene you're talking about, the one where they're hanging off the train tracks like that. I want to know if anyone. I want to get the temperature check of everyone else, because when I first saw this movie, because it doesn't have any exposition for the first like hour really, aside from that vampire hunter angle about like it is vampires and that's what's going on and here are the rules, because you don't get any info from the vampires themselves up until that scene, which after that one where the guy also like sort of agrees to literally drop off the bridge and then he just wakes up in his bed, etc. So what you realize then is he is sort of like fully vampired out and he obviously has the powers and he didn't die, etc. Before that scene, this is why I took like the peer pressure angle. I still couldn't tell until that point. Are they like fucking with him and they're all vampires and he isn't? And they're just trying to sort of like get him to kill himself essentially and something like, but it's only after that scene you realize like, he is fully like that. Did no one else have that vibe? Did you already take it for granted that he was one of them already? Because obviously this is one of the movies where, because all he had to do was drink the blood, and we'll get into this later, like this isn't like the traditional way that you get turned to the vampire. It's more subtle, you know, it's sort of gradual, isn't it?
Yeah, because usually you have to be bit. And,
so I couldn't quite tell where they were going on that one. But,
it was David's blood in the bottle, right? It was David's blood, and they said the transformation doesn't complete until he Michael makes his first kill, which he resists throughout the movie. Like he's not going out and drinking blood, so he's feeling sick as a result of that. But I agree. I think the ambiguity of that scene is what's so interesting. Like, are they just fucking?
For me, though. That's why I wondered. Did no one else have that vibe? Because I actually thought when he fell, like, oh right, so that's where they're going with this.
Here's the thing:
I wouldn't have taken that initially.
When he falls, the next shot is him falling into bed. So you don't even know if he has all the powers. He could have just been caught or rescued by the vampires, and they put him back home. Right? You don't know what the end result of that scene is. So I do think that the ambiguity is part of the tension and what's interesting about that moment.
Yeah, and obviously it is introduced in the opening scene, which I kind of think is a bit of a mistake in the movie, that these guys can fly. You know, we know that they have that capacity.
They use some of the camera shot, though, where they don't show you them flying. It's really well done, isn't it? Like when he's coming in, that looks dope.
Considering it's a pre-drone, you know.
And I also found that actually a lot more scarier premise for a vampire. The idea that a vampire is just like a more stronger human who kills you on the ground to kill, that's not that scary. The idea that like they pick you up and fly off like a fucking eagle, that's terrifying. Like, because then if you fight the fucker, you just look like a million miles up at you. That's terrifying.
Yeah, and you know, it's I understand why that scene's there, because it does establish them as a dangerous threat. But I think if you take that out and you have them more mystery, I think that scene where he drops off the train tracks would be a bit more like, what the fuck's happened there then?
Right.
You know, and a bit more mysterious. But I think because you know they can fly, it's clear that David and Michael have immediately hit it off. In you know, and it's really a love story between those two.
Well,
and so he's not going to let him fall. You know, he's not going to, and we know he can fly. So.
What I love about that too is just the way that he meets David in this movie, which is again more homosexual undercurrents, because they're at this concert on the boardwalk, and what he's watching is a sexy sax man who is
oiled.
By the way,
it
unironically looks just like Triple H from when he's in his prime WWE. He looks so much like Triple H just trying to be Axl Rose, basically. That's the analogy. Like, it is, and he is literally dripping in oil, his whole body the whole time, and he is jacked as fuck. And as Monty says, like some sort of mad 80s meme, he just starts playing his saxophone.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Well, it's funny because I'll talk about it. I'll talk about the sax
this movie
thing
also is pure Americana. If you like classic American cinema, this is going to be right up your alley. It's all the aesthetic you want. It's pure America.
So what I love about this is that he's in the crowd and he sees Star, the woman that he is pursuing and ends up having sex with later, because obviously they couldn't actually show gay sex in this movie, even though it's heavily implied that that's, as Richard's pointing at, that's what this is about, right? You can say, oh yeah, you know, he's not gay because he has sex with a woman, but you know, the undertext, it's not even subtext a lot of the time. It's just very blatant, as Richard is pointing out. So what I love about this is he's like sexy sax man and oiled up, and then he's like, but I want to look at this woman, but also sexy sax man. And he ends up chasing Star, the woman, through the crowd, and she ends up then with David. And then once again, he has this choice between David, the sexy vampire, or Star. So it's kind of like him looking back and forth and trying to figure out his sexuality via who he is infatuated with or who he should pursue in these scenarios. Because ultimately, he ends up pursuing David. At the end, it becomes not about Star. It becomes about a motorcycle race with David. And so he goes from looking at this hot guy to looking at this hot girl, then to really pursuing this hot guy back to his vampire later. And that's very interesting. Also, just as an aside, this whole greased up saxophone guy ended up becoming it ended up being the symbol that was like permanently in people's minds. Like Saturday Night Live made a digital short with John Hamm as this sexy saxophone player named Sergio at one point in time. It ended up as part of the meme with the guy who is oiled up, who would go play Careless Whisper in public places and get kicked out by security guards. That became a very famous, like, viral meme video, you know, maybe like 10 years ago. So this was a really durable image.
Song also, because if people don't know, you have to be British to really appreciate this. But the ultimate, one of the ultimate all-time, I won't say heel turns, but sort of like reveals in British pop music was that George Michael spent a solid like 10 years doing all this pop music for girls, etc. And then the joke is it all just reads completely differently when you know he's gay. Like all those songs, like those Careless Whispers,
right.
Father Figure, like they all just read completely coded totally differently when you know. I mean, I think he even said he did write them all about men, as far as I know. I think it's even a famous thing he said. So that's actually even sort of akin to how this movie goes to some degree.
Yeah, and you know, I love as well the hunter of the vampires are coded as the two action heroes of the Reagan era. You've got the other Corey is Rambo'd up, and the other guy is dressed in, you know, gym gear like Rocky Balboa. And so they're the ones who can't stand the threat to masculinity, and they go after them, which is also interesting because I think they sort of code Sam as gay as well. He has that scene in the bath where he sings that song, I ain't got a man.
Oh, okay.
I ain't got. So he wears a Hawaiian shirt,
right.
You know. Yeah, so it's like there's so much going on, like in this movie.
Just the outfit in the first scene when Corey Haim's at the boardwalk, right? Just his outfit there, freeze frame that. And if you are not from the 80s, that is the most absurd 80s stereotype ever, where he has that sort of like light fabric-y sort of a suit overlook, Monty, and he has like the Bermuda shirt under. It's like it's so absurdly on the nose for all those movies. It's actually ridiculous. Like, you know, that's what I like about this is. Again, it's one of those things about cinema that I think people don't appreciate always. Cinema actually is a bit like philosophy, where, yes, you can on some level appreciate just a concept viscerally the second you encounter it, but it's all building on stuff. Like, if you don't know what things are referencing or what later would be referenced, like, you won't enjoy part of the elements of this. Because one of the things I loved about this was, if you've seen a lot of 80s movies, you immediately know where you are the second this movie begins. Like, there's no confusion. You'll very quickly sort of be adapted to the patois of the movie instantly, basically.
Yeah, you know, I want to say it did feel on this rewatch, it did feel like a movie of two halves. Like almost like not as tonally wild as like Dusk Till Dawn, right?
I mean, the funny thing is, the first hour or so, like I say, isn't even really like a horror movie, mate. It's just a good movie. Like the second half becomes we have to kill the vampire. It just becomes that, doesn't it? You know,
exactly, and sort of the shift in focus, because obviously, you know, the Frog Brothers are there. Running their comic store, and basically Sam is kind of in the background a little bit, but then for the second half, it really becomes about Sam wanting to help his brother by getting rid of the head vampire. They think, then, you know, they get all the, you know, holy water, fucking water balloons and water guns and all of that stuff. And it's like, you know, it's just, it feels like a very different movie once you shift into that phase. It feels like the 80s had this kind of weird particular, you know, we want to make edgy, we want to take movies for kids, adventure movies for kids, and we want to take it to the edge where we can have it, you know, like Indiana Jones Temple of Doom does this, Goonies does this, Monster Squad does this. And it kind of felt like, you know, you could see how this movie could have been that. It's almost like Schumacher and the direction they went in sort of elevates it from being another kind of like fondly remembered, edgy movie for kids. But yeah, it's like, it does feel very strange. It's like a very abrupt, there's like, it's all mystique and seduction. And then it's a bunch of teenagers running around staking vampires.
Yeah, which is, I mean, the end is bad. There's no other way to put it. Like,
basically, I do think the worst part of the movie is the Deus Ex Machina that the wacky granddad, for no reason whatsoever, just rocks up on some Van Helsing shit with an actual, like, drives a car in that has stakes. I'm like, that is a pure Deus Ex Machina, because they haven't even set that up. Like, yeah, they've made it that, like, he's this weird, interesting figure who occasionally is comedic relief or move the movie on. But, like, that part is just like, why is that just at the end? Like, and then he has that even like shit-eating thing of sort of like, you know, the problem with this place, too many bloody
vampires. Yeah,
it's like some pure like, what's this? Why
I hate that.
The movie? All right.
So what was so funny about that entire sequence is it's absolutely a Deus Ex Machina. They did set it up a little bit before, because there's a scene where the grandfather is digging post holes with the spikes the spikes. So he's digging a post hole out there. So he was trying to make their posts for a fence. And so they did set it up a little bit with that shot. But at the end, why would he back a truck into his own house? He was coming back from a date, and he has no idea what's going on inside. And he decides, yes, truly, now is the time to back my truck through the front of my house on a lark. And then he accidentally stakes. He could have, by the way, he could have staked his own daughter, by the way, accidentally in that scenario. But luckily, the stakes only hit the vampire.
The other thing is, low key, this guy is like your dream if you are a teenager watching this movie, what you will be like when you're an old man. Because like he essentially is just living like the bachelor dream, isn't it? Like he's fucking all these like lonely widows in town, which he's even making explicit, by the way. And then also like he's doing stuff like, see this one shelf of the fridge? That's where I keep all my sodas and fucking ice cream sandwiches. So you stay out there like, the fuck? This guy's living the dream. What?
Yeah, I know. The bit as well where he's going out on a date and he's like, he puts Windex on his cheeks. Yeah, it's great.
How about some Windex, Grandpa?
Yeah. Let me try some of that, huh?
But at the end of the movie, and this is what I agree, Thorin. It's just so egregious because it's the last line of the film, and it just ends after this. He's like, you know, the problem with Santa Clara, there's too many goddamn vampires. And then you just, I expected to.
No, the rest of the movie's so well set up and everything. Why just end on such like a whack note? I know.
But I just expected at the end of that just the da 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 da.
I do like the grandpa character. I think he adds a really sort of necessary contrast because I think that, I think this movie was trying to straddle like two age groups, and essentially you've got if you're a kid and you're like in your early teens, you can watch this movie and enjoy it for all the things, it's about two kids living the dream, running a comic store, and they get to kill vampires in their spare time. But if you're the older, 18 to 20 demographic, you can watch this and be like, yeah, man, people don't understand what it's like out here on these streets, and you've got that, cool aspect to it of how seductive it would be to live this lifestyle that these vampires have. And they don't shy away from like unlike a lot of the other movies we talked about in this group, they really make it seem like being a vampire is great.
Yeah,
it's actually mega. No one can fuck with you. You're sexy and young and thin forever. You've got cool clothes. You even found a fucking unreal piece of like real estate.
Dude, normally, that's not the big downside.
Yeah,
you got food.
Exactly.
Just eating food, even having an awesome time. Yeah,
having some Chinese takeaway, just chilling out, partying all the time. So, I mean, unlike a lot of the other movies in this, like they just say, yeah, being a vampire is fucking rad. But the end to the
which,
movie
by the way, it
dumb.
would be, if we're being honest.
I don't know, dude. I go back and forth on this all the time because, like, eternal life, yeah, okay, sign me up for that. But then that's probably going to get sad and bad. And what does that really mean? Like, if you've read that fucking the end, the series where it's like in Marvel, and they have it with the Hulk, and he's just alone on the planet, the last man,
right.
and he can't die. Because every time he has a heart attack when he's Bruce, the Hulk gets angry and keeps him alive. So he's just in a state of perpetual torment, just utterly alone. You would eventually get to that point, wouldn't you?
I mean, but you can always just walk outside during the daylight and kill yourself. So I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose you do have an off switch. There is that. I don't know. Although, that doesn't happen in this one, does it? It's basically, this is the cheat code for vampires. They get to eat food, they get to have sex, they can party all night, but they can even go out in the day a little bit, just put some sunglasses on. I was going to do that anyway because I'm so fucking goddamn cool. So, I mean, I don't know, like, like, there's no downside to being this vampire other than if someone backs a car up through a wall with a fucking fence post in it, you might die, So yeah, but the end is silly, but I actually like the last line of the movie.
Oh, come boo!
No, I do. I think when he says, "Oh, the goddamn vampires" or whatever, and then it's just a hard cut to the Echo and the Bunnymen cover of "People Are Strange" by The Doors. I think that's great. I think I like it's like fuck it. It was a
One thing about living in Santa Carla I never could stomach. All the damn vampires.
it tells you at the start of the movie. It's a roller coaster. Like, look, it's a theme park. We're gonna have some fucking fun here. So it's okay to end with a ridiculous one-liner like that. Like, you thought your adventure was something special. Crazy Randy Grandpa's been dealing with vampires the whole time. Doesn't even give a fuck. It's just another day of the week to him. So no, I actually do fuck with that line at the ending. I don't like how they kill the head vampire. Fair enough. But yeah, can we talk about the dude who plays the actual real head?
Sure.
Max.
Like I say, he really is just literally. If I said to you, cast someone in an 80s movie, Richard, who's going to be some sort of business owner / respectable citizen who's going to date your mother who's an ex of somebody, like this would be the guy you would cast. It's like so out of central casting, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and so he's like a really long-standing tenured character actor, but he was also like a director. He was a writer. He'd just been around Hollywood for so long. Like, he's one of these rare people who, like, they have to have a separate Wikipedia page for like all of the shit they did. They have like the summary, and then these are all the movies they were in. And this guy, he's been in so much stuff. He just is that guy. You go, oh yeah, he's in that thing, and then you can't remember what the thing is. But he did a bunch of like, mega movies where, he just has to sort of turn up and look like an accountant. That's it. Like,
yes.
Just get me that guy who could, he's got braces, the
salary man, isn't he?
Just get me that guy. Yeah. And that's what he is. And, incredibly, he is the guy, I guess, because they know that's kind of what he became associated with, that look. He does a voiceover for the commercial that Jordan Belfort makes in The Wolf of Wall Street.
Oh, okay.
So obviously, he has got that.
Like, if you're one of those weird people who watch these but didn't watch the movie, all you have to envision in your mind is literally the boss from Office Space. You know what I mean? If he could just like stay around all night and do it, it's basically that guy. Like, it isn't literally him, but it could be that guy, basically.
Yeah, it's amazing. But I mean, I thought he does such a he is the contrast to The Edge. I actually think if you cast another actor who plays it straight, I think the movie would suffer for it. One of the things that I read about the critique was that, that there's like no one got the memo about what the tone of the movie was, and everyone puts in really inconsistent performances. That's like, some of the film critics go with that. I think, again, that's by design. I think you need the mother seducer. I think you do need him to be almost broadly comedic, like, and that's literally what he goes for.
Stick with the granddad, right? It just brings you back out of the movie into reality again. You're in everyday reality, yeah.
It's also like, there's several different tonal shifts that you see, because there's obviously the more serious kind of late teenager interactions with the sex and the Lost Boys within their lair, but then there's also kind of the silly comic book narrative of the Frog Brothers and their wacky ways to try and trap vampires, and it's childish in the way that they approach these scenarios, which is why it's very reminiscent of Home Alone, which happened 91, I think, so a few years, early 90s, so a few years later. But I think a lot of Home Alone is like very much drawn from inspiration from this movie, with the way they trap the house and everything at the end of it. And then you also get the kind of innocent mother dynamic and all of this. So I didn't find the tonal shifts particularly jarring, because you got a taste of different phases of life from people. Right. And it's reflected in the kind of over seriousness of the drama of the late teenagers, plus the fun of the children, and the more, I would say, like family focused dynamics of the adults.
Yeah. Well, that's what's great about the film. Like, there's not really any time to like linger on, when the tonal shift happens. And I agree, I don't find them jarring at all. I think the strength of this movie is that it's very indulgent, but it never goes out to one sort of tone more extremely than the other. It's always bringing itself back, so it keeps a kind of cohesive, shape, if you like. And the pacing of the movie's great. There's just scene after scene. It just goes along. No boring exposition scenes.
Yep.
No, just long shots for no reason. It's scene. Things are happening. Stories developing. Every scene is connected to the previous scene, and it tells a really coherent story. And there's always something to watch in the scene.
Yeah,
you think
something's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like there's a new element to the story introduced. So, it starts, okay, they've moved. They're in the house. You meet the grandpa. Let's go down to the boardwalk. Wow, there's sexy saxman and sexy star. And, now here's fucking sexy Kiefer Sutherland. Wow, this is amazing. Right, okay, let's cut back. Oh, there's some funny interactions with the granddad. Okay, now you're meeting the vampires. Now you're in their secret lair. Now you're dropping off the train tracks. Now you got your sunglasses on. Now you're asking your little brother for help. Now what, and it's just boom, 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 98 minutes.
Yeah,
and this movie is fucking tight.
And it's the pacing, it's the aesthetic, like we said, all the sets, all the character design, the haircuts, the styling, the costumes, all super good. And we talked about the music too, and the music is also just great. And a lot of it's more environmental. Like obviously they kind of hit you over the head with "Cry Little Sister," which was the song that was made for this. Which I love that track. Like unironically, I think it's great. But also, you mentioned the Aerosmith song "Walk This Way," but that's just environmental of people listening to that music at the beach when the vampires are hunting, right? They brought in Excess, which was very popular during this time period, to do some of the songs. You mentioned the "People Are Strange" thing at the end, which I thought was a great way to end the movie, but the soundtrack is really great. And you know what's funny, guys? I don't know if you found this when you were doing your own research, but they finally made a "Cry Little Sister" music video by G. Tom Mack, who is the artist who did this.
I didn't know this, actually.
They just made it last year for its 35th anniversary of The Lost Boys. So now he's like obviously quite old, and he's like against a green screen singing this song. It is great.
I got it. I got it.
It is great.
Yeah, but this is what's really interesting about the way they're together, because I really don't think, I don't think Warner Brothers sort of knew that this was going to be like a cult movie. But I think Joel Schumacher did. I mean, I think he instinctively knew that how this was going to play and how it was going to be regarded and how it was going to find an audience. Because, as Duncan has said, this is the quintessential 80s zeitgeist. This is what's going on, guys. We've got Reagan's, America. We've got traditional. It's the tonal clash of the outsiders, the subcultures coming into conflict with, genuine, fondly regarded Americana. Right? It's a movie about the nuclear family and sort of, being a more traditional thing, and then the other type of modern family, So
it's even very explicit, because the whole thing is at the end. It almost, the commentary is almost that the idea of the obsession with the nuclear family. It doesn't say the nuclear family is bad. I want to make that clear. But it does say that the obsession with having it can be destructive, because, it's almost this domineering vampire who is trying to force this woman into being these boys' mother, in a way. And it's insidious. It really is, right? And I think the question is is that being forced on certain people within the society? And is it necessary? I mean, it's a big question about family dynamics that you end the movie with.
I would even say you could paint it this way too. Think about the beginning of the movie when they arrive at the granddad's house, who is obviously coded as was some sort of hippie type new age figure, right? Where he's got all these weird, a very eclectic set of things in his house, and he himself is into taxidermy, which is probably the weirdest sort of not totally psycho hobby you can have in America.
It's so great though. I love
when they arrive at this house, the first thing they complain about is he doesn't have a TV. And then what does the Corey Haim guy, the guy who just complained about not having a TV? He goes on the boardwalk and immediately just flexes that he has loads of old school, very old school comic book knowledge. Like, that's another thing this movie to me is, since it's an 80s movie when culture's shifting in a potentially scary new direction, it's sort of like that is old school Americana. That's almost like the 60s colliding with whatever the 80s is going to become, which obviously and then the premise goes, culture comes through children, at least in the modern day, without going on a whole tangent. It comes, your kids encounter the other kids and then the things in their youth culture, and then it seeps into the family that way. So there's even some of that, I think, built into this movie.
I think it's even a commentary on television itself, because remember, they have all these adventures because they're not at home watching TV. They have to find other things to do, and that becomes, even though bad things happen to them sometimes, it becomes a much more transformative growing up experience. And also, where does the mom go to work? At the television store, which is owned by the vampire, right? And it's almost as if the seduction element of the vampire is also present in the idea of the seduction of television in a way, right? So I think that's despite, which is weird because it's also a movie, so you wouldn't think it would be making these kinds of commentaries, but I feel like it is.
Yeah, so I think it's great. This was a summer movie. It was a summer event movie that had no right to sort of succeed, to the degree it did, and it's
crazy how well it's held up, though, isn't it? That's the thing to me.
So good.
Well, I mean, also I think it's broader impact on culture. I don't think we can get to say a Buffy the Vampire Slayer, for example.
Mate, when they were even doing the special effects, I was thinking of that exact thing. So people don't know that's one of the things that Buffy sort of like brought into the mainstream culture, is that when you're the vampire, you get that little like weird burrowed forehead or whatever. They do that basically. That is act effect. No, mate, so much. I actually think low key, this is like a sleeper movie that so many movies have stolen from aesthetically, or like certain like concepts and tropes. Like this, like, I know I'd have to check the timeline, but I feel like there's a bunch of things have taken from this. And it's so stylized as well.
Absolutely, and this was essentially what I think. Because when we talk about next week, when we talk about Near Dark, this is one of the reasons Near Dark doesn't do as well as a movie, because that bombed at the box office, is because of the existence of this movie. This is what people wanted vampire movies to be moving forward, right? They wanted it to be this, really sort of decadent, mysterious, sexy, kind of lifestyle. And so, when I think it's the same year.
It's the same year. Out. Yes, it was like 5 months later, I think Near Dark came out.
An ultra realistic, horrifying nightmare of being a vampire, So yeah, this movie basically, and I would even say it informs Twilight and all that other stuff. Like, you can't have any of the other media that comes without this as the touchstone. This was Joel Schumacher, who, obviously sadly passed away a few years ago. But this is like Joel Schumacher absolutely like just swinging for the fences about, the gay experience in America, and doing it by using two mythologies, because it's not just an updated myth about the vampires. It's obviously all the Peter Pan references in the movie. The fact that it's called The Lost Boys. I think Joel Schumacher said in an interview, he was obsessed with the idea that Peter Pan was a vampire. Why doesn't he age? Why does he fly? And so I think he took that, and incredibly, he said he was reading a lot about British gypsy culture as well. The idea of being an itinerant, the idea of having to move around all the time. So, he sort of combined all of that into this, just incredible, like I say, 80s experience. Like, I actually thought, like, I hadn't watched this movie in about, I don't know, like 20 years.
Oh, really?
It would have been a long
I think I saw this movie about 5 years ago, but I was shocked at how much I loved it again.
And I never had a desire to go back, right? I never felt the calling of the Lost Boys.
Really?
Watch it last, for real.
I love this movie.
And I was like, wow, actually, the way I'd remembered it was sort of, it was. I remembered the goofy. I remembered the goofy aspects and none of the actual really cool stuff, and the really solid fucking performances from everyone. You know, like actually, this is a legit 80s film. This is like really good.
Yeah, I agree. I thought I had seen it more recently, like I said, but even I forgot. I got so drawn in immediately by the cinematography, the aerial shots at night of the boardwalk and all the carnival rides. This movie just drips cool. It just drips cool, and you really feel like you're part of the trends of that era. And it's easy to understand why this film was so popular with young people in the 80s, because it was an icon of the most cool aspects of American West Coast society at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as well, just in terms of its legacy, I almost want to say, I don't think it's a forgotten movie, but it's not one you see lionized a lot these days. Like, I don't see, the YouTube algorithm never seems to mention The Lost Boys these days, right? But a lot of films from that era, a lot of 80s movies seem to be permanently thrown up. People are doing reviews and retrospectives and clips in the shorts. Not really. It's almost like this movie is kind of, it's like survived by its children, and as I say, like, you think about, Buffy and Angel and all of that stuff. I mean, that could just as easily be the fucking Lost Boys, the series. The Frog Brothers learned kung fu and kicked the shit out of vampires every week. It could have been the same thing. So yeah, its cultural impact is actually like quite profound, but for some reason, no one really seems to bring the movie up a lot. I don't know if that's just my impression and that's not accurate.
I don't hear about it a whole lot. I agree. It's interesting.
Yeah, super crazy.
My final note would just be like to bring it all the way back to the beginning. I do think actually Joel Schumacher is an underrated director. And if you enjoyed this movie, I would just say go and watch the one I said, the 8mm movie with Nicolas Cage. It's actually just a very good movie.
Yeah. And again, like launched, that was the one, Joaquin Phoenix.
I think that was one of the earliest ones, yeah.
Yeah, that was where he he plays like a scuzzy porno video salesman who helps Nicolas Cage.
It's one of like the rare ones where Nicolas Cage is like in a serious role, but he does a really good job.
Yeah. One of the rare ones.
Yeah, like he's not even at all trying to camp it up,
Yeah. But yeah, well, look, my final thoughts about The Lost Boys. I think this, as I said, I think it's one of the quintessential 80s movies. Like if I was pulling together a top 10, it would of 80s movies. If you wanted to know what life was like in the 80s, it would be on there for me, along with Top Gun, obviously, which would be the first on the list.
By the way, this is also actually just a legit good movie beyond the genre of vampires. You don't have to care at all about vampires for like the first hour or so.
I almost think it's incidental. As I said, I think the reading of family, the reading of what it's like to experience peer pressure, the reading of what it's like to grow up, and it's just a movie about a family that has an extraordinary set of circumstances kind of happening to it. And the fact that it's a vampire thing is almost incidental. It's just sort of a compelling story that draws you in with its premise. And then, it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's just, a masterclass of, just keep it moving. Let's just keep moving along, and I miss that about movies. This isn't like Marvel shit where it's 3 hours long and there's a 15-minute scene of just Robert Downey Jr. having coffee with someone that definitely doesn't need to be in the film. It's like everything happens for a reason. It looks beautiful. The performances are great. Costumes are great. Sets are great. Music's great. It's just a fucking good time.
I miss pacing. I missed attention to pacing.
Don't we all?
It's like just make every scene good. Get me in and out of the story in an hour and 45 minutes or less, please, for the love of God. All right, guys, thank you very much. We are going to be on with our last 80s vampire movie, Near Dark, next week, and we'll also be announcing our new genre. So we'll see you then.